Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a realistic dog nose. There's a lot of fun little details we're going to cover in this tutorial, so let's get started. So we're picking this up at the point where I've already painted about half of the dog's face. And so now what I'm doing is I'm taking my size 8 silver black velvet round brush, spreading out the bristles and applying some fur texture all around the nose. For a convincing nose, it's important to help it feel merged to the rest of the head. Now I'm using the wet and wet technique and starting with some base washes of color inside the nose itself. I'm using transparent brown oxide mixed with a little bit of ultramarine blue to neutralize that brown, and gently painting it wet and wet on the nose, just in the areas where I see darker shadows, such as around the nostrils, in the center point, and on the underside of the nose. I've mixed up a purple now. This is alizarin crimson and ultramarine with a little bit of the brown still in my brush. And in my reference photo, I definitely see some hints of purple and blue. So that's what I'm applying right now, and even doing a little bit of cross-hatching wet and wet in the light areas. This is a little more burnt sienna mixed in, and I'm doing some horizontal brush strokes across the front of the nose, and then taking some blue and using that to paint across the top. As I mentioned, there's definitely a cast of blue and purple in this nose, especially on the top of the nose, so that's what I'm painting here, and then watering down the paint quite a bit more as I come to the center of the nose where it's the most in light. You'll notice I left a couple little highlights, a little bit of the paper still showing through. That's important to let your nose feel shiny and wet. I'm continuing to build up layers of fur texture all around the nose. This is also very important at the top of the nose where it's connecting to the muzzle. You want it to all just look like it's merged, like it's fuzzy, and feels connected. I'm switching to my Le Benzin small, stiff synthetic white brush to paint the nostrils. To create black, I like to mix Daniel Smith indigo and burnt umber or transparent brown oxide. And I like to start with those deep dark nostrils, painting meticulously and slowly, the little comma shape of the nostril itself and the center line right in the middle. It's important for these little details to have a brush that can hold a nice fine point. These Le Benzin brushes are so awesome for that, and they never get uncomfortable because the bamboo handles are just so comfortable to hold even when you're working on these tiny details. You can see I'm painting so carefully these little curled shapes of the nostrils. The center of the nostril is still in the light somewhat. Because the dog is facing direct sunlight, there are going to be little areas that are more in the light. So take observation of those and don't fill them in completely black. Be sure to leave all your highlights as much as possible. At the end of the painting, I will use some opaque white to restore some of the highlights, but as much as possible, try to leave the white of the paper as your main source of white in a watercolor painting. All around the nose, I'm beginning to apply texture, gently moving my brush in the direction I see these little bumps and cross-hatching somewhat. You can see the paint is beginning to wear off of my brush, and I'm working on a dry surface. The paper is dry here. So I'm using what's called the dry brush technique, allowing my brush to scrape across the surface of the paper, missing the little valleys of the paper, and this is actually causing some natural texture to form on the paper. I love using this effect for muzzles and for noses because it's almost effortless as far as leaving the highlights for you. I'm mixing in a little bit of burnt sienna, applying that inside the nostril, and beginning to increase the dark shadows all around the nostril. It's still much too light. I dip my brush in water to remove some of the paint and remove any excess on a paper towel, and then you can see my paint is now quite a bit lighter and quite wet, so I can begin to blend the color from dark to light in a seamless gradation. I'm using that mid-tone to outline the underside of the nose itself and to apply another wet layer across the top, darkening anywhere I see where the nose needs to just be slightly darker. You can use more of a broad sweeping motion of the brush, pushing your brush into the belly to create broader brush strokes. And then where you want to create fine detail, of course, lift your brush delicately and feather it away to produce tiny, little fine lines for the texture of the nose. Right now, I'm just using more water in my brush, but it's still quite controlled, and just mid-tone colors to darken gradually, layer by layer. I love to use a cross-hatching technique as well to create that texture on the nose. Don't make it too perfect. You don't want it to look like a checkerboard, and make sure that you're adjusting your values based on what you're seeing in the reference photo. For example, the top of the nose here is definitely much lighter than the bottom. So I've watered my paint down quite a bit as I continue to layer, just making sure that my values are right. That's the most important thing when you're painting anything, really, if you want it to look realistic, is to check your values. Make sure that you're painting dark enough darks and keeping the highlights nice and bright. And the midtones are really going to be what shape and form the 3D effect of whatever it is that you're painting. I'm filling in this highlight with a little bit of a bumpy motion of my brush, again, leaving highlights of the paper showing underneath. And you can already see it's really looking like a shiny, moist nose. You're going to laugh because I really love this nose so much. That's why I chose this reference photo. It's just so beautiful. It's got all these beautiful rich colors, purple and brown and blue and black, and is so beautifully lit in the sunshine with all those little details. I just had to paint it. Now I'm continuing to darken the shadows underneath the nose to help it feel merged to the muzzle. It's helpful when you apply dark paint on the underside to use your brush to kind of pull that paint out in a way, continuing to produce texture around the nose while also darkening. You'll find that you can often do simultaneous things as you apply brush strokes. For example, here I'm applying texture, but also darkening and helping it look like the nose is moving from light to dark in a more gradual shape. I'm using more of my black combination to darken up the fur on the muzzle just above the tongue, moving my brush in the direction the fur is growing. Unless you're just painting a nose study, I'm guessing you're going to need to paint everything around the nose as well. So it's important to make it all feel like part of the same painting, not just a button that was cut out and slapped on the dog's face. All of this fur texture is really going to help with that. Now, if you want to paint this complete Bernese Mountain Dog painting, good news, this tutorial is available in real time. Just head over to emilyolsonart.com where you can become a Watercolor Mastery member. For just a small amount per month, you can access my growing library of almost 100 tutorials. Each one comes with a downloadable reference photo and sketch, a complete list of supplies used in the project. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check that out. All right, let's get back to the video. Once the nose is dry, you can begin to add even more layers of color. I'm taking ultramarine blue and applying a broad, sweeping brush stroke of blue across the top of the nose, increasing that pop of color. If you have too much water in your brush, do try to remove some of the excess so you don't end up with any hard edges or puddling and pooling. Now I'm taking a scrubbing brush and scrubbing out some of the paint over those highlights, just to soften that area and help it feel a little less detailed. For my final details in this beautiful nose, I'm taking my opaque white. This is Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and it's one of my favorite products for painting both whiskers and these little tiny shiny details to finish up the nose. You can see I'm using it to apply a little bit more white texture around the mouth. I do recommend when you're using an opaque white like this that you spread it all throughout the painting in little spots here and there so it doesn't look like it's just isolated in one area. Now for the nose, I'm taking the tiniest tip of my Lebenson brush and just gently dabbing on these teeny tiny little dots, reflecting the light and the shine on the nose. These final little details can really make your painting look amazing at the end. Definitely do save this for the very end and make sure that your paint is completely dry underneath so that these little details don't get washed out. It's easy to overdo it, so be sparing with these wonderful little white details. And make sure that any areas you're applying this white, it makes sense. It should be a spot in the painting where the sun is definitely shining. For example, don't apply white in the shadow areas, just where the light is shining. So there we have it. There is our finished Bernese Mountain Dog. I hope you guys enjoyed this nose painting tutorial. Leave me a comment if you'd like to see any other tutorials all about painting specific parts of an animal portrait. Check out these other videos about painting dogs in watercolor, and I'll see you there.